Hello there, and welcome into a Monday edition of the show. Getting started a little bit later than usual, but the Avs were playing. And I appreciate you sticking around, tuning in, whether it's on your radio, online at extrasports1300.com, or if it's through the free Extra Sports 1300 app, sponsored by Diversus Health, mental health, and well-being for all. Now, here's the part where I would say a veritable cornucopia of sports topics coming your way over the course of the program. But because the Colorado Avalanche exercised the right that many of you have today by not showing up to work, it will be just football for the next 2 hours. And, of course, the national championship game is going to be played. I have some thoughts at the end of that, but mostly NFL stuff. So let's get started, shall we? 719-247-1313. The last game of divisional weekend, the divisional round of the NFL playoffs between the Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens, was a perfect encapsulation if that's the only game you watched all weekend. It was certainly the most anticipated. But if that was the only game you watched all weekend, you will know the story of the entire divisional round of the playoffs. You don't need to be absolutely the best team from beginning to end to win in the playoffs. You don't have to win every single possession and assert your dominance. If you do, awesome. But you don't have to. Ultimately, to win in the playoffs, it's those 3, 4, 5 moments throughout the game that end up meaning everything and overriding everything that has happened over the course of the rest of the game. You got to win those. And you can win in the playoffs. NFL's usually, most games in the NFL are one-score game. In the playoffs, it's absolutely that, maybe a little bit. Well, if during the year it's a touchdown one way or another, this is probably a field goal one way or another. But it's just about being on the right side of those very few moments where the game is actually decided. And what you saw last night was the continued evolution of Josh Allen and what this Bills team has become. Lamar Jackson and the Ravens outgained them, had more explosive plays. You could say statistically, except for the one statistic, which kind of makes my point, but you could say overall statistically, and you can just watch that game and say Lamar Jackson was the more dynamic, more talented, dare I say, better performing quarterback in that game on the whole than Josh Allen was. Yet they lost because in those few moments that ultimately decide the game, the Buffalo Bills won them and the Baltimore Ravens didn't. The Lamar fumble in the first half cost the Ravens points. The interception leading to a touchdown in a one-score game was big. But you have to say Lamar Jackson did make up for those mistakes later on in the game. And that was, he was fortunate to be able to do so because there's still another half. He made his mistakes early and he was able to account and make up for them. But that doesn't mean they didn't hurt Baltimore. And didn't mean that you can't look back and say, well, that cost them too. Mark Andrews wasn't as lucky. Or was he? The fumble he had, and And it was a fumble, but I think that's not doing the Buffalo Bills justice. They punched that ball out. We saw some other fumbles, especially in the Rams game, where it's just a dude lost it. Okay, the Bills took that ball from Mark Andrews. So credit has to be given to Buffalo, and that's kind of my overriding point. I'm not trying to put all this on one person or on one team. I'm just saying in those moments, one team wins them and one team loses them. So characterize the fumble of Mark Andrews how you see fit. But that turnover felt costlier than the two that Lamar had. One, because Lamar had made up for it. But two, because you just had this feeling that if that stands as a completion, that the Ravens almost certainly score and probably take control of that football game. There's no way of knowing, but you watch enough football, I think that's a reasonable conclusion to come to. But yet that didn't happen. Bills got the ball back. Then they were able to have the lead, and Mark Andrews, lo and behold, had an opportunity to redeem himself. The same opportunity Lamar Jackson had in a way to overcome his mistake. And could you imagine, just for a second, could you imagine the discourse today? Because you thought about it when Sean McDermott took the 3. You're like, would you have gone for it there on 4th down? I know Tony Romo made a compelling case. But yeah, be like, they're not going to try and finish this thing off. They're going to give the ball back to Lamar. Could you imagine the discourse today if Lamar drives down the field, Mark Andrews catches the 2-point conversion, that game goes into overtime, which, to be fair, the Bills still had time, but let's say they didn't take advantage of it. They go to overtime, and the Bills' fate is decided by a coin flip again. But none of that is happening because Mark Andrews dropped that ball. The Bills have taken a cue from the team that has been a thorn in their side more than any other team, and that's obviously the Kansas City Chiefs. Because when you look at what the Buffalo Bills did yesterday, it's what Kansas City has been doing. They're not impressing anybody with putting up a ton of points. The Mahomes magic isn't as prevalent. It doesn't seem like there aren't as many highlight reel plays for Patrick Mahomes in a game as there used to be. The Chiefs don't look as formidable as they did a few years ago. But yet, all they do is continue to win. Why? Because when they lost Tyreek Hill, and part of, I'm sure, went into the decision of letting Tyreek Hill go, was if we are just better in those few moments that ultimately decide the football game, we don't have to be dominant. They would love to be dominant. They'd love to keep Tyreek Hill, but it's a salary cap league, and choices had to be made. And they said, you know what? If we're still what we need to be in those few moments, we will continue to win football games. And they have. They've invested more in their defense to make sure they get those timely stops. Mahomes is still Mahomes in those moments. Kelsey is still Kelsey in those moments. They have one of the best kickers in the game in Harrison Butker, and they are one of the most well-coached teams, if not the best coached team in the NFL. They have everything they need to win those few moments. The Buffalo Bills facing some of the same dilemmas as the Kansas City Chiefs, and also looking at the Kansas City Chiefs and how they have continued to win despite losing talent, despite everyone saying they're not as good as they once were. The Buffalo Bills said, let's try that. And it goes into what Josh Allen was talking about in the postgame with Tracy Wolfson. Everyone said we're not talented enough, not big enough, not this, not that. And there's a lot of truth to that. You could look on paper and say this Buffalo Bills team is not as talented as any of the last few. And you watched Josh Allen yesterday, and you would say, in a way, he was not impressive. Again, he was largely outplayed by Lamar Jackson. But what was the most important stat of yesterday? 0 turnovers. Josh Allen in the past has cost the Buffalo Bills. Now, they wouldn't even be in the playoffs without Josh Allen being Josh Allen. But that feeling of Josh Allen wanting to put on a Superman's cape has cost the Buffalo Bills. And there was a moment in that game where he gets stood up near the goal line on that final drive, and he's looking and seeing a wide open player that he can lateral it to and chooses not to. The evolution of Josh Allen and the evolution by extension of the Buffalo Bills. We are not going to be that team that makes the critical error. If we need Josh Allen to throw on the cape because situations warrant, we know we still have that. But if we don't have to call upon him to do those kind of crazy, unbelievable plays, then we won't. And yesterday they didn't need to. They stayed the course. They took care of the football, and it was the Baltimore Ravens that made those mistakes. And that is what the Kansas City Chiefs have done for the last 2 years, when everyone swears that they're not nearly as good as they once were. They're not as talented as they once were. Neither are the Buffalo Bills. There will come a time where Josh Allen has to throw on his cape. Maybe it will be Sunday. But it wasn't yesterday. Lamar Jackson had to, in part to account for his own mistakes, in part to account for the rest of his team's mistakes. But that was the theme throughout the weekend. Every team that won was outgained. At least 3 of the 4 teams that played this weekend, I think you may be able to make a case that at least Washington was better than Detroit 51% of that game. That was a pretty resounding victory. But certainly for the other 3, you could make an argument that Kansas City, Buffalo, and Philadelphia were all outplayed for more of their respective football games. But yet, in those moments, Philadelphia, Kansas City, and Buffalo were on the right side of those moments. Some of them were things that they did. Some of them were things that their opponents did. But they came out on the right end of those few moments, and it decided those football games. They say that the NFL is a copycat league. Sure looks like the Buffalo Bills are following the example that the Kansas City Chiefs have laid out the last couple of years. And now it's one of the reasons why this may be the best equipped Bills team to beat Kansas City. Because now you have a Buffalo team that you, in your head, are going, what they're not going to beat themselves. They're not going to make that crucial mistake. Josh Allen has learned that lateral that wasn't it being the prime example. Josh Allen will take care of the football, and look at his numbers. Look at how well he took care of the football this year. It's like we haven't seen this when it comes and you think of the number of things that Josh Allen does and how much they still rely on him. But he doesn't fumble. He doesn't throw interceptions. Buffalo, while they rely on Josh Allen, are more balanced between run and pass. And I don't mean run as in Josh Allen running or Josh Allen passing. With James Cook's emergence, they are more balanced in that way. So they ask less from Josh Allen than they once did. I haven't decided yet if I think the Buffalo Bills are going to win Sunday. But the Bills team that I have watched for most of this season and watched last night is the best equipped they have ever been. They play the game the best way possible to be able to beat the Chiefs because the Chiefs are the team that force you to make those mistakes, and Buffalo's not biting. It was a conservative game plan. At times, it wasn't aesthetically pleasing, but everyone in Buffalo, New York could not care less because they're, again, one step away from the Super Bowl, and they feel like this actually might be the year despite not being as talented as they have been in years past. 719-247-1313. We're going to get into all the games this weekend, and I would love your thoughts. Now, the next place I'm going to go is to a team that supposedly had a little extra help getting to their conference championship game. I think you know who I'm talking about, and we will discuss next on Extra Sports 1300. Rapid radios are instant push-to-talk walkie-talkies offering national LTE coverage and no subscription ever. The big game is coming up, and it's time to plan your big game party by placing your pre-order with Hooters. You could get 50 boneless wings for $79.99 or 50 bone-in wings for $89.99. And, of course, Hooters will be open on February 9th, so if you want to watch the game at Hooters, you'll have a chance to win a custom-engraved Hooters Colorado Solo Stove. Either way, bring Hooters to you. You go to Hooters. Make Hooters a part of your big game plans. Now, let's set the parameters for this next conversation because it could get a little bit out of hand given the subject. Let's start here with the officiating in the Houston-Kansas City game. One thing that I think we can all get on the same page with, and that's where I like to start these conversations. Let's start with something we can agree on. Actually, there are a few things we can agree on. One, if you, especially in today's NFL, when so many quarterbacks, right, including all four that are still remaining in the playoffs at this moment, all four of them possess the ability to run. And it's great. It's awesome to watch. Once they are a runner, they are to be treated as such. Can we agree on this? For years, the argument, because I always thought that Cam Newton took a lot of shots, and he took shots that quarterbacks today take that would immediately get flagged. But looking at it the other way, because they argue, well, Cam Newton can run. He's a runner. Well, even in the pocket, he was getting hit high, and there were no flags being thrown. I don't have an issue with protecting quarterbacks, even to the point where you go a little bit above and beyond, maybe always erring on the side of protecting the quarterback, because you remember 2 years ago when we ended the regular season with like half the league's quarterbacks were hurt. Nobody wants to see that. We want, and pretty much the face of every franchise is their quarterback. Nobody wants to see playoff games or regular season games without Mahomes, Allen, Lamar, and throw in a list of all your favorite. I don't even want to watch most of these other teams with lesser quarterbacks. I don't want to see, Teddy Bridgewater the other night for a play or two was fun. I don't want to see him for a whole game. I want to see Jared Goff. I have no problem with them protecting quarterbacks, but there has to be a line that once you cross it, you are now a runner. And however you would be officiated if you were Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry, and maybe Derrick Henry's an extreme case, but if you are officiated as a running back, that's all I want. I'm not putting it on the books that this, that, and the other. Just, it's like the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. Treat quarterbacks that run the football like running backs. And then you would probably not get that second roughing the passer that was called when the two Texans defenders made more contact with each other than they made with Mahomes. Now, letter of the law, that was a penalty. But I am okay with the idea of, you know what? Once you're going to run, all bets are off. It's on you to slide. And something has got to be done with the loophole that Patrick Mahomes has learned to exploit when it comes to sliding late, whether it's him or any other quarterback. And maybe it's good that we're having this conversation about Mahomes, because if it was Jared Goff that did any of this or Bo Nix that did any of this, nothing would ever get done because not enough people would care. because Mahomes is doing it, because he's the face of the league, this conversation's in the forefront and will spur change. Something has to be done about him sliding late. It is not fair to the defenders that he or any other quarterback can all of a sudden decide to slide at the last second and the defender get called for a personal foul penalty. Pat Surtain pointed out perfectly on Twitter. So we can agree on that. We can also agree that it is unbecoming of the face of the franchise to flop blatantly on the sideline in order to get a call. I abhor flopping in all its forms, no matter who it is. Right? The NFL, the last thing the NFL needs to do is get the reputation like the NBA. That flop that Mahomes had on the sideline was egregious. It is unbecoming of somebody of Patrick Mahomes' stature. And if people are going to keep doing it, then there needs to be a penalty for it, just like there are penalties for embellishment in hockey and in soccer and technical fouls for flopping. I hope the NFL doesn't get there, because it would be super soft for NFL players to be doing that enough to force a rule change. But that's ridiculous. That flop on the sideline was ridiculous. Looking for a foul. Okay? Now that we have all agreed on all three of these things, we can move forward to the real conversation, which is this idea that the Kansas City Chiefs are aided more by the officials than any other team. It is just not founded in reality or logic. Treating quarterbacks like running backs when they start running is a logical argument based on facts presented. The idea that the Chiefs get more help than anybody else from the officials is just flat out wrong. It is incorrect. And it is just because it's the Chiefs. Everyone wants to talk about a pro-Chiefs bias by the league. There is a clear anti-Chiefs bias by fans who think that Mahomes gets all these calls. He doesn't. Do you know who has the most accepted roughing the passer penalties in the league? It's Jared Goff. Is he too protected? Is the fix in for the Detroit Lions or the LA Rams when Jared Goff was there? Patrick Mahomes is 9th on that list. Russell Wilson gets more roughing the passer penalties. Baker Mayfield gets more roughing the passer penalties. So that's not true. If the referees were favoring the Kansas City Chiefs, certainly the Kansas City Chiefs would be the team with the most opponent penalties called, right? The other team gets called for more penalties against the Chiefs than anybody else. Nope. That's the Minnesota Vikings. Think the league is fixing it so Sam Darnold can have success? Chiefs are 16th on that list in terms of their opponents getting called for penalties. How about them not getting called for penalties? Do you know who the least penalized team in the NFL is? It's not Kansas City. Rams, Cardinals, Colts, all commit fewer penalties than the Kansas City Chiefs. There is not one metric out there that you can hold up and say that the Chiefs garner favoritism from the officials other than I'm sick of seeing Mahomes get calls and I'm mad about it. I'm not saying he doesn't get calls. He does. just like LeBron, just like Connor McDavid, just like Wayne Gretzky, just like Michael Jordan. All the greats get calls. And I get it. It's so counterintuitive. If they're so much better than everyone else, why are they always getting the benefit of the doubt? Shouldn't they not get the benefit of the doubt? Shouldn't they have to, in a way, battle through more adversity to level the playing field? No NBA player got more calls in the 90s than Michael Jordan. No hockey player has ever got more calls than Wayne Gretzky. You couldn't even touch Wayne Gretzky. LeBron probably gets more calls than any NBA player today. And Mahomes does get a lot of calls. When it comes to roughing the passer, he doesn't get the most, but he gets a lot of calls. Not saying that never happens, but this idea that it is disproportionately favoring the Kansas City Chiefs, it is just not based in reality. The Kansas City Chiefs, in many ways, are a modern-day New England Patriots. Right? They do a lot of the same things the Patriots do. They dominate. They have a quarterback that everybody hates. And it's perceived that they cheat or that they get favoritism from the referees. But what's funny is that the Chiefs haven't even been doing it for nearly as long as the New England Patriots. And by doing it, I mean winning. We are less than a decade in to this Chiefs dynasty. Far less than a decade in. The Patriots ruled the NFL for 20 years. And people are, I'm tired of the Kansas City Chiefs. They're way worse than the New England Patriots were. How is that possible? How is it possible when the Patriots, you dealt with it for 20 years and the Chiefs, you dealt with it for what, 7? But I know the reason why. You know, you were following over the weekend TikTok getting banned and then not getting banned. TikTok is part of the reason. Instagram is part of the reason. X is part of the reason. You get so inundated with Kansas City Chiefs content in a way that you never got inundated with Patriots. If you turned on ESPN, certainly you would be. But they would have an NBA show at some point to break up the monotony of talking about the Patriots 24/7. And then you have this other screen that you are also inundated. And if you watch one video, guess what the algorithm does? Here's 5 more. You see a picture, Taylor Swift and Caitlin Clark are in the the owner's box together. That's kind of interesting. And X goes, you like that, don't you? Here's 8 different angles of them talking to each other. And here's a bunch of people on TikTok and Instagram trying to figure out what Taylor leaned over and whispered to Caitlin Clark. And then when Patrick Mahomes gets a call, then you have 8,000 people on social media putting out the video about how egregious this is. And it makes you think that Patrick Mahomes gets more calls than anybody else. It makes you think that the league favors the Chiefs disproportionately to everybody else. Get what I mean? It's just not true. There's no metric to say that. But in the age of social media, everything is so overexposed. We are so inundated with content that because the Chiefs are the modern day NFL dynasty, it takes less than half the time that we got sick of the Patriots for people to be sick of the Kansas City Chiefs. But and I don't all I'm arguing against, I'm not arguing against your Kansas City Chiefs fatigue. I understand the reasons for that. That's not what I'm arguing against. I'm arguing against the idea that the Chiefs get all the calls and nobody else. How about the offensive pass interference on Keon Coleman last night? Oh, wait, they didn't call it? Like, if you want to say officiating in the NFL is bad, I'm right there with you. But to think it only impacts opponents of the Kansas City Chiefs negatively is just, it's not true. And the protection of quarterbacks is extended well beyond Patrick Mahomes. The reason why, and the worst part about it is that the Houston Texans on the way out fed into it. I talked about Patrick Mahomes flopping, how unbecoming that is. How unbecoming of it, of the Texans is it for them to all blame the referees for their demise? You want to show a lack of maturity and want to show how you're not ready to compete at the highest level in the NFL? You're blaming the refs. You're believing that you went into the game having to battle against the referees. Well, you already lost that game. Call that Chiefs aura. Call that the mystique of the Kansas City Chiefs. Teams walk into that building and already think they lose because the referees are somehow against them. So I thought it was a really bad look from the Houston Texans. Will Anderson, who absolutely hit Patrick Mahomes high, and any other quarterback would have gotten that flag. CJ Stroud, D'Amico Ryans, all want to talk about officiating before they want to talk about their own mistakes, like losing the average starting field position by 20 yards. How about having a field goal blocked and missing another field goal? How about allowing your quarterback to be sacked 8 times? None of that had a bigger part to play in you losing than 2 borderline calls. 2 the entire game. I know I said the 4 or 5 moments are those 2 of them. And by the way, the Houston Texans failed to answer Kansas City Chiefs scoring drives 4 out of the 5 times Kansas City scored. The Houston Texans did not lose to the Kansas City Chiefs because of the referees. Nor do the Chiefs get more calls than any other team. Officiating is a problem throughout the NFL. Totally agree with you. Rules need to be changed. Quarterbacks can't be protected all the time, everywhere on the field. 100% agree with you. Mahomes just doesn't get the amount of calls that people think he does. 719-247-1313. I'm sure I might get a little pushback on that, and I understand. But I'm trying to base my reasoning in logic and reality based on numbers and facts, not perception and what TikTok tells me. 719-247-1313. We'll continue on. We haven't even talked about the NFC yet, and that was just as good, if not better. I think the NFC, all told, better couple of games than we got in the AFC. We'll talk about those coming up here on Extra Sports 1300. Avs fall today to the Minnesota Wild, 3-1, the final score. Talk about that a little bit more at the top of the hour, but I want to continue on with the football, my reaction and your reaction to the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. 719-24/7-1313. I want to move to the NFC and talk about what we saw on Saturday night. Because no matter what happened in Detroit, we would have a great story. And perhaps in many ways, with all due respect to Bills Mafia, which has a fair amount of the country pulling for them, maybe America's team. Philadelphia, Kansas City, a lot of people are saying they don't want to see either one of those teams, and certainly not a rematch between those two teams. So you could argue Buffalo, but I think in many ways, the winner of that game could be America's unofficial team. Because of how tortured those fan bases have been. Lions back in the NFC Championship to try and redeem themselves after last year, or you have Washington doing kind of what Detroit did last year and making their first conference championship in forever. But the downside to me was only on Detroit's side of things. There was no downside with Washington. Sure, there would be disappointment if Washington lost. Commanders fans would be disappointed that their season that they had enjoyed so much had come to an end. But, you know, I keep comparing Washington and Denver. They are very similar. Washington getting into the postseason and winning a playoff game, huge success. They could have gone boat race by Detroit. And I don't know how you could characterize anything in Washington other than a smashing success. They had no downside. Detroit had the downside, and wouldn't you know it, we're talking about Detroit losing and wondering when they'll make it back again, as in it may be a while. Today, Ben Johnson agreed to become the next head coach of the Chicago Bears, which kind of is a double gut punch to the Lions, considering that not only is he leaving, but he's staying in the division. Aaron Glenn, Adam Schefter keeps saying Aaron Glenn is absolutely taking a job. And Detroit can find their closest Philadelphia Eagle fan and ask them how it goes when you lose both of your coordinators in one offseason to head coaching jobs. It's hard to replace them. It takes time. Now, you can also talk to a Philadelphia Eagles fan about how not to lose hope, because Philadelphia is right back in the NFC Championship, but last year was a disaster. This year, it's been really touch and go in terms of their belief that Philadelphia would get to where they are now. You do wonder if last year was Detroit's best shot and they squandered it. And I think Saturday just exacerbates that idea. Because there probably was a feeling of, as gut-wrenching of a loss as that was to the San Francisco 49ers, and how much Detroit gave that game to San Francisco, or did their part to give the game to San Francisco. When that pain subsided, there was still Still got Goff, still got Amon-Ra St. Brown, still got the head coach and his coordinators intact. We're running it back. Then Aiden Hutchinson gets hurt. And then about 15 other guys get hurt. Now, this is not ultimately the reason why the Detroit Lions lost the game, because they were just as banged up on Friday as they were on Saturday. And Friday, most everybody picked Detroit. So even with all their injuries, they were still favored and not by a close margin. But they were less healthy than they were a year ago. Now, next year, they're not going to have Ben Johnson or Aaron Glenn. And one of the teams that has all of a sudden ascended is the one that just knocked you out of the playoffs. And it's reasonable to think that Washington, and they might make the Super Bowl this year, could be better next year, at least on paper. San Francisco won't be nearly as hurt as they were this year. So you do wonder if, I don't want to say if Detroit's window is closed, because they still have a lot of talent on that roster. They have the best running back duo in the league. They have a quarterback that has proven that he is more than what we labeled him in Jared Goff. They have one of the best wide receivers in football. They have one of the best tight ends in football. You still love Dan Campbell. Their offensive line is terrific. They'll get Aiden Hutchinson back at some point. I'm not going to be so overly dramatic and say that the Lions window has closed. But you do have to wonder if last year was their best shot. Because they ran up against the best story in these NFL playoffs. That one hurts. I mean, no matter who wins that game, unless you have something inherently against, if you're a Cowboys fan, Eagles fan, Vikings fan, Packers fan, fandom aside, you have to be genuinely happy for the fan base that came out on top on Saturday. And you would feel really only gutted for Detroit fans. Because, again, Washington had no downside. And that's part of what makes them dangerous. How dangerous is Washington? Tell you in a little bit. For now, take your thoughts. 719-24-7, 1313. More Drive Time Sports coming up. But first, I want to tell you about QC Kinetics. Now, maybe you've been dealing with chronic joint pain for a very long time. So long, in fact, that you just accept that joint pain as normal. Oh, it's normal pain. Wait a minute. No pain should be normal. Not if you can do something about it. And I know steroids, surgery, pain pills, they don't really work or work long enough. But QC Kinetics is offering an alternative that actually attacks the reason for that chronic joint pain. They are the nation's leader in regenerative medicine. To put it another way, joint preservation. You can revitalize your joints with advanced orthobiologic treatments at QC Kinetics, like tens of thousands of patients across the country have, many of them right here in Colorado Springs. They've discovered these treatments and are living life again without that constant pain in their joints. You owe it to yourself to at least sit down for a free consultation, right? It's a free consultation. Sit down, find out what it's all about, and then go from there. Call QC Kinetics, 719-347-1988. That's 719-347-1988. Welcome in, Drive Time Sports. Ryan Kaufman with you. You can watch the show live on our social media platforms, which I see many of you are doing. Thank you for that. Whether it's Facebook, X, Instagram, or YouTube, the handle is the same, at XTRA Sports 1300. National championship game coming up in less than 45 minutes. I have some thoughts that I would like to share with you, and I'd like your thoughts on anything in the world of sports. 719-247-1313. And perhaps you have thoughts on any one of the three stories, even though I've only been on for an hour, still covered a lot of ground. Here are the three stories that are driving the show. First, let's go to the NFL and the game everyone was waiting for.
Two-pointer ties the game. Here's the snap. Jackson will run to his right. He looks, he throws. It is dropped! It is dropped! Andrews was open at the pylon and dropped it. His second drop of the game, and the Bills maintain a 2-point lead, 27-25. Andrews was open. The ball hit him in the chest, and he could not hang on going to the ground.
Westwood One on the call as heard here on Extra Sports 1300. An epic matchup between Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. And wouldn't you know it, we're talking about mistakes that ultimately decided that game. Mark Andrews with that drop, which would have tied the game. Earlier, I thought he had the most consequential mistake of the game. When you consider that the Ravens were driving, if he had not had that ball punched out, and the Ravens, I think they score. I think they take control of that game. We will never know. But the big takeaway, not just in that game, but in all four divisional round games, is that you don't have to be the best team from minute 1 to minute 60. You don't have to win every single possession. In any football game, there will be a few moments that pop up, and you best be on the right side of those. The Baltimore Ravens, for large stretches of that game, outplayed the Buffalo Bills. Lamar Jackson, on the whole, looked like a better quarterback than Josh Allen. And I could say this about the Houston-Kansas City game. I could say this about the Philadelphia-LA game. And I could kind of say it with the Washington-Detroit game because it was turnovers that really hurt Detroit. But I think Washington did enough outside of that to say they were just overall the better team. I think they won at least 51% of that game. But 3 of the 4 games came down to a few plays that went the way of the winning team that was getting outplayed for most of the game. That's what it takes. And the Buffalo Bills, to me, when I watch them, I say they look like the Chiefs. The same thing that the Kansas City Chiefs are doing that everyone says, how do they keep getting away with it? How can they keep winning these games? Mahomes isn't what he used to be. They don't have Tyreek Hill. Travis Kelce moves like my father-in-law on the field. How do they keep winning these one-score games? It's their formula. They have built their team this way. They've invested a lot of capital on the defensive side rather than the offensive side. They lean on their coaching, and they say, worst comes to worst, we still got Mahomes that can throw a ball when he's basically horizontal with the ground and hit Travis Kelce in the end zone. The Bills have taken a page out of Kansas City's playbook here. Josh Allen, we love you. You're great, and there may come a time where we need you to throw on that cape, but we're going to try and make it so you don't have to. We're going to be sound. We're going to make the right decisions. We're not going to turn the ball over. And Josh Allen, we're not going to ask you to do too much. And Josh Allen has learned, just like Patrick Mahomes has learned and Lamar Jackson needs to learn, that you don't always have to make the amazing highlight reel play. You will get your flowers as a quarterback if you just win. You win in the playoffs, you win Super Bowls, you will get your flowers. You will be recognized as one of the best. That's something that Josh Allen has started to grasp, and you look at the way he has played. The number of mistakes that he has are minimal this season. Minimal mistakes. Part of that is because of the game plan. Part of that is because James Cook can take some pressure off of him. Part of it is he doesn't have one Devo receiver demanding the ball every 2 seconds. But the Buffalo Bills are playing like the Kansas City Chiefs have played and has gotten Kansas City to back-to-back Super Bowls. The Buffalo Bills are not as talented as they have been in years past. But they win on those margins that decide football games. And for the longest time, they weren't winning those. And that's why they are the best equipped to beat Kansas City this time around in the postseason, something they have never done. They are better equipped for it this Sunday than they ever have been. The caveat is Kansas City is the best at what Buffalo is trying to do. It will be a fascinating matchup that will live up to the hype, but it will look so different than previous iterations of Mahomes versus Allen. But it's the right way to go about it. And that's how the Buffalo Bills beat a more talented team in the Baltimore Ravens yesterday. They won those 4 or 5 moments. They did not beat themselves. Baltimore did. Let's move to news from today for story number 2. Altitude Television on the call. Mackenzie Blackwood was about the only member of the Colorado Avalanche who did not take the holiday off as the Avs fall to the Minnesota Wild 3-1. That was the best save of the game for Mackenzie Blackwood. It was not his only jaw-dropping save. He had another one on a point-blank chance by Eriksson Ek. He kept the Avs in the game. And they ended up winning thanks to Nathan McKinnon. But ultimately, the rest of the Avs collectively just did not play. They were outworked, and they deserved their fate. Mackenzie Blackwood didn't deserve his fate, but the Avalanche did. They just had nothing, which, I don't know, letdown game after they hung a half a dozen on Dallas? Maybe. But that was a disappointing effort from the Colorado Avalanche, who are coming off of a huge win against Dallas. One thing on that Dallas game, looked great. Love that second line. That second line did nothing today. The Dallas game on Saturday reminded me a lot of the matchup with Winnipeg. Not the last one, right? It was great. Right? They beat the Jets on our Hellebuyck Open. They looked great on Saturday, beating the Dallas Stars. Jake Oettinger was not good. Okay? Nothing they can do about it. It's not the Avalanche's fault.
But if this stretch of games is supposed to show where the Avs lie in the pecking order of Stanley Cup contenders, they didn't exactly get the best shot from Dallas.
But they took care of business to their credit. Today, they didn't to their
discredit.
Bad effort today. But Mackenzie Blackwood made 2 unbelievable saves. Story number 3 out of Chicago. Ben Johnson has decided to take the Chicago Bears head coaching job, and Ryan Poles is going to stay employed, we think. There was earlier talk that Ben Johnson didn't want to work with Ryan Poles. And then there was talk that Ben Johnson didn't want the Chicago job, that he was going to get tampered with by Tom Brady. And now Ben Johnson is going to be the head coach of the Chicago Bears, which is the best get anybody could have gotten. Ben Johnson, I'm not saying he's surefire going to work, but of the candidates available, he was the best one. And the Chicago Bears got him. And that should speak to the type of situation the Bears have as opposed to some of these other teams. They're all dysfunctional in a way. They're all bad teams that need turned around. But Ben Johnson looked at all of these situations and decided, because he could write his own ticket, the Bears are the best chance for me to be successful. And he should have arrived at that conclusion because it is the spot that he has the best chance to be successful in. And now you wonder about the dominoes, the domino effect. Is Pete Carroll going to go to Vegas? Because if Aaron Glenn, let's say, goes to New Orleans and Mike McCarthy ends up going to the Jets or vice versa, are the Raiders going to, is it going to be Pete Carroll? Are we going to have an AFC West with Peyton, Harbaugh, Reed, and Carroll? That's going to be a fun division. As if this year wasn't fun enough, but all of those guys in the same conference. Four of the best football coaches of their generation, you have to, all told, in the same division. And then if the Raiders get a quarterback, they all have quarterbacks. Be interested to see how the dominoes fall after this, because a couple of days ago, I thought McCarthy was going to go to Chicago and Ben Johnson was going to go to Vegas. Now we'll see how things go. 719-247-1313. Take your thoughts on the 3 stories that are driving the show. Coming up next, the Washington Commanders continue to defy the odds. How dangerous can they be? And could it be possible that the best chance at the NFL dethroning the Kansas City Chiefs is with the Washington Commanders? Think it's possible. I'll tell you why next here on Extra Sports 1300. There is an interesting little tidbit with the hiring of Ben Johnson. I saw earlier today that he would be targeting Dennis Allen, former Saints coach, for the defensive coordinator gig. And I've said if Vance Joseph gets fired or ends up leaving for a head coaching job, I could see Dennis Allen taking the vacant Broncos DC job. Well, it looks like Vance is going to stay on. Right? If McCarthy and Aaron Glenn are going to the Jets in New Orleans, depending on who chooses who, and then the Raiders go this Pete Carroll route, Vance Joseph would remain the Broncos defensive coordinator, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But the Broncos are looking for a new special teams coordinator. And everyone, I think correctly, connected the dots to Darren Rizzi, who is just serving as the interim head coach of the Saints to take over the special teams duties under Sean Payton. Ben Johnson's also interested in Darren Rizzi. So could Ben Johnson build Sean Payton's dream staff in Chicago? And then what happens if Ben Johnson says, I want Davis Webb to be my offensive coordinator? So we'll see. The bidding war for Darren Rizzi has begun. So we're down to 4 teams now in the NFL, and one of them is the Kansas City Chiefs. So the chance of a three-peat is still alive. And so which one of these 3 teams would you say has the best chance to knock off Kansas City? Now, I have been saying on today's show that Buffalo is better equipped and plays in a way that matches them up better with Kansas City than they have in years past. Not to say that, but I mean, did you see that graphic from Amazon today on social media? The matchups between Allen and Mahomes it's a dead heat. Same number of wins, same number of points, same number of points given up. Like, it's crazy. But the idea that waiting for Josh Allen to make that, is he going to make that big mistake? He hasn't this year. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying, and then plus James Cook, an emergence of a running game that doesn't directly involve Josh Allen, even though he's still very much a part of it, an actual running back on the Buffalo Bills. But I'm not so sure that the best chance for the Chiefs three-peat to be stopped isn't Jaden Daniels in Washington. First of all, Jaden Daniels is the third best quarterback, you could say, remaining in these playoffs, which doesn't sound like high praise, but my point is that he's really good. Okay, so it's not like the Commanders are getting here with Brad Johnson or Trent Dilfer. What Jaden Daniels has done, you watch him during the season, and you're like, he can't do this in the playoffs. And then he does it against Tampa. And then you're like, well, but he's not going to do it against Detroit. And he does it against Detroit. So they have a quarterback who is insanely talented and can make plays, coupled with naivete, which I think would serve him well. Because as much as I can say about the Buffalo Bills that on paper they match up better, and I like that Josh Allen you're not waiting for that big Josh Allen mistake. Who's to say that can't reemerge going against the Kansas City Chiefs? Some of those old memories, old demons come back up. It's possible. Philadelphia has the same baggage. Washington has no baggage. And they are led, and make no mistake about it, Jaden Daniels is their leader. They are led by somebody who is too naive to understand that that moment should be too big for him. Because that's what he's been doing all season. Look at the number of games that the Commanders have won at the death, including one against the Philadelphia Eagles. Jaden Daniels is unafraid, unintimidated. And look at him. Just look at him on the sideline. He's smiling the whole time. He's having the time of his life. He is unburdened, to use former Vice President Harris's term, unburdened by what has been. And I mean that too when it comes to the Commanders' history. He has he knows, but he doesn't know. He wasn't a part of the Commanders' history. He has nothing to do with that. And he's also unburdened by what has been because he has never gone up against the Chiefs. He doesn't have those scars. He doesn't have those memories that can pop up for Philadelphia or could pop up for Buffalo. I'm not so sure the biggest threat to Kansas City. Buffalo's a threat. Philadelphia would be a threat. They're all threats. I'm not sure that the biggest threat isn't Jaden Daniels. And I said this a few weeks ago. I thought Detroit might be the right team to take out Kansas City because they wouldn't sit back. They would go for it. Right? Dan Campbell, always going for it. They would go and try to take that win. And maybe that's the kind of team the NFL needs to end the Chiefs' run. Well, Dan Quinn's got some of that. Now, the only caveat is that Dan Quinn has some of those demons when it comes to the Super Bowl, into the playoffs, just not against Kansas City. I think all three of these teams offer something that could put them past Kansas City if they were in. Obviously, the Bills are matching up with the Kansas City Chiefs. They're all threats. I could see any one of these four teams win the Super Bowl. But there's something about Jaden Daniels and this Commanders team that maybe they are the right blend of talented and don't know any better. They don't know any better than to be worried about going up against Kansas City. Could be. We'll see. Obviously, they have their hands full with Philadelphia. But you look, Jaden Daniels, you want to talk about confidence. So he's naive against these other teams. He's confident against the Eagles. He beat them in a game where he could go, I wasn't nearly at my best, and we still won. We have a great Final Four because any one of these four teams can all beat the other ones. But what a story Washington is. And it really is a shame because if not for Washington, the Broncos would be getting so much right now. They might get not even might. They would. Brock Bowers, sorry, you had an unbelievable season. If not for Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix would be the Rookie of the Year. if not for the Washington Commanders. The Denver Broncos would be the most remarkable story in all of football. But Washington has taken exactly what Denver has done, and they've done it better. And they are an example, and I saw J.J. Watt's tweet, and it's like Broncos did the same thing. New owner, new coach, find the right quarterback, and away you go. But Washington has been down for much longer than the Broncos have. Washington fans would give their left arm for merely a 8-year playoff drought. And they would take the unrest at the top of the organization that was caused by Pat Bowlen stepping aside over what they had to deal with in Daniel Snyder. So they've done the same. Washington and Denver have done it in a very similar way, and in almost no time at all have completely turned around the franchise. It's just that Washington has been down for longer, and they turned it around in a bigger way than Denver did. They have the rookie of the year. Denver doesn't. They're going the NFC Championship. The Broncos are not. But it's amazing. You get stability at the top that hires the right coach, and that right coach picks the right quarterback. And you see in both the Commanders and the Broncos how quickly it can get right. But you're still blown away by how quickly it got right in those two places. And I would say that the people's matchup for the Super Bowl would be Buffalo, Washington. I think that's what a lot of people would like to see. I'd probably like to see half of that matchup. Of course, I'm talking about I'd rather see Buffalo and Philadelphia. Obviously, that would be the matchup I'd rather see. But crazy what Jaden Daniels is doing. He is so good. And there's a bigger Jaden Daniels conversation about where we need to put him in the pecking order of NFL quarterbacks. Remarkable. 719-24-7-1313. Coming up next, give a couple of thoughts on that Philly-LA game over the weekend, and also talk about this national championship that's getting ready to get underway in 10 minutes or so. The big game is getting even closer. It's time to plan your big game party by placing your pre-order with Hooters. You could get 50 boneless wings for $79.99 or 50 bone-in wings for $89.99. You can also watch the game at Hooters, of course, on February 9th, and you'll have a chance to win a custom engraved Hooters Colorado Solo Stove. So no matter whether you're watching the game at home or you want a place to go, the answer is Hooters for your big game plans. National championship getting ready to get underway. And is it just me? And this is a rhetorical question because I know it's not just me because I've seen many people share this sentiment. There is just no juice behind this national championship game. All the anticipation for this expanded playoff. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be the college football is going to be the best it ever has been, the best season, And now, kind of nothing. Kind of, oh, by the way, the culmination of a college football season like we have never seen before. It's really going to go out with a whimper? You wonder, and I don't have a problem with no SEC teams in the national championship. You have to wonder, without that Alabama or Georgia or LSU representation, whether that has sapped some of the conversation and interest. Which, it's really kind of silly when you think about it, right? It's like the NBA. Why do we care so much about market size? Like, this has been a big discussion with the Cavs and the Thunder meeting up. Why do we care? We don't live there. We're just as close to Oklahoma City and Cleveland as we are New York and LA. I mean, why do we get so obsessed with what market's there? Why do we get obsessed with what conference is represented in the national championship? These are two unbelievable football teams. But I wonder. I think what it is that the SEC, and score one for, the idea that hate is a compelling reason to watch something, that without the SEC, you just don't have enough people caring. It's not that Notre Dame and Ohio State are Cinderellas or no names, two of the biggest brands in college football. But I think so much of the popularity and interest in college football comes from the South that when they are omitted, it feels like there's less juice to these games. Because either you want to see the SEC superiority continue or you want to see it fall on the biggest stage. But this is a tremendous matchup tonight. And I would be surprised if Ohio State boat races Notre Dame. I think we're going to be in for a decent game. I think Ohio State's the better team. I think they win. But if Ohio State just boat races them, then you kind of wonder, all right, is that part of it? And I think for some people it is. For some people, they expect Ohio State to demolish Notre Dame. And that is kind of disrespectful to Notre Dame. It really is. They've made it this far. They've beaten really good teams to get here. They didn't get SMU and Boise State in the first two rounds like Penn State did. Okay, Notre Dame knocked off Georgia. Knocked off Penn State. Could it be because Marcus Freeman is so likable that the people who would hate watch this game, wanting Notre Dame to get destroyed, now can't because they actually like Notre Dame? Some people are asking. Because it's not a timing thing, because we're always dealing with the NFL play. Is it this particular week? Is it because the divisional round is where we really lock in? And the fact that this is at the tail end of divisional weekend, it's possible. I mean, aren't they usually in the midst of NFL playoff season? And don't we, as a country, care much more about the NFL than we do college football? I think the answer is yes, but yet anticipation level very high. Not for this one. It just doesn't feel like it. I'm going to watch tonight. I'm interested. I hope we get a great game. One game that I had yet to really discuss today from the divisional round weekend is I perhaps make the point of, here, let me talk about college football for 5 minutes and then 10 minutes talking about more NFL. Maybe that's what it is. I thought there would be enough room for both. I guess that's my sentiment. I really thought the Rams are going to win that game. I picked them going into the weekend. I thought that they outplayed Philadelphia for large stretches of that time. They clearly had the better quarterback. I thought the Eagles were not running Saquon enough. He still ended up with, 25 carries? I'm like, that's not enough. You rested him week 18. He needs 40 carries. And when Matthew Stafford threw that pass that Puka Nacua caught on the sideline, I was like, they're winning. The Rams are winning this game. But to get back to the theme of the weekend and the theme of this show, when the Rams were staring the end zone right in the face, a surefire win, Jalen Carter, the Philadelphia Eagles. They were outplayed for the majority of that football game. But in the moments that mattered the most, that red zone possession for the Rams after that circus catch by Nacua on the sideline, the Eagles defense, as tired as they had to have been, still found a way to get to Stafford not once, but twice to seal that game. And then Saquon Barkley is absolutely unreal. Those are the two things. My two big takeaways. The story has been done to death, but every time I watch Saquon Barkley run, I cannot believe that the Giants let him go. And it's not like we're like, oh, Saquon's washed. Nobody thought Saquon was washed. Nobody thought he was washed. But he was unreal in that game. And I think if you're looking at it as an Eagles fan and anticipating perhaps a Super Bowl rematch with the Kansas City Chiefs, you're looking at number 26 and going, that's what's different. That's why it's going to go our way this time. And I don't blame you. because that dude is on another level. And I'll say the same thing about the NFC Championship and a potential Super Bowl matchup that I said going into the weekend with the Rams. If the game has to be won on Jalen Hurts' arm, I don't like Philadelphia's chances. But if they can win on Saquon's legs, they got a real shot. My third takeaway from that game, I lied. I had 3 takeaways. My third takeaway is I don't want to hear anyone anymore profess their love for snow games. I have been saying this for weeks. I do not like snow games. They take away from my pleasure viewing the broadcast. And I don't like that weather has a say. And you can't tell me that in Buffalo and in Philadelphia, that weather wasn't a factor. If I were ranking the reasons why Philadelphia won that football game, probably number 1 is Saquon. Number 2, Jalen Carter. Number 3 is the weather. And it's hard not to feel that way when the team that they're playing plays indoors in Los Angeles. And the quarterback they were going up against has played his home games his entire career indoors. And you know the stats with Matthew Stafford when he goes out into the weather. But so I don't like those games. I don't like it. And, you know, nobody asked my opinion on the Broncos' new stadium. I think being that I'm not a fan, I don't get a say. I don't think Denver should go outdoors. I don't. Retractable roof or the roof with the hole in it, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. With the possibility of hosting a Super Bowl down the line somewhere. I'll speak to a fan base that I think I am welcomed into. Because there's a difference when it's a historical stadium. Right? Arrowhead is historical. Lambeau is historical. Right? But if the Kansas City Chiefs ever decided to build a new stadium, and I think they're angling for one, I wouldn't want it to be outdoors. That's my own personal taste. I understand that. I vote for it. Like, and Empower Field is not historical. There is nothing about that building in Denver. Mile High is historical before they tore it down. That was the historic stadium. I don't want to slap a roof onto it. But if they build a new stadium, I'd say some kind of a roof. Control the elements a little bit. I don't like watching it. I don't like it. I don't like that it's a factor. I don't. But it will always exist as a factor. There will always be outdoor stadiums. And here's the importance of getting home field. We didn't see it everywhere in the NFL, but we saw it in Philadelphia. And you certainly, I don't know how much of an advantage Baltimore plays in the elements as well, but the elements were a factor, and they seemed to be more of a factor on behalf of Buffalo than they were Baltimore. And they were definitely a factor against the LA Rams. If that game is in LA, LA wins. But it wasn't, because Philadelphia took care of their business, had the better record, had home field, and they deserved to take advantage. That's part of it. My idea of all new stadiums being covered eliminates home field advantage, for a lot of teams. But home field, it matters. It matters to Philadelphia. It mattered on yesterday. This national championship's being played indoors, by the way, in Atlanta. Notre Dame has the ball. Second down. I think this is their first possession. I don't think Ohio State has touched it yet. Second down and 3 for Riley Leonard and the Irish. That will be one of the primary topics of conversation coming up tomorrow. And, of course, the divisional round, and looking forward to the conference championship Sunday coming up this week. I appreciate your patronage. Hopefully, I didn't ruin what was a good holiday for you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Please stay warm. My God. Tomorrow's supposed to be 40. I might wear a tank top and shorts. Please stay warm, stay safe, and we'll talk to you tomorrow at 3 here on Extra Sports 1300.